My name is Anthony Chung. I'm a senior market analyst at RANsquawk. This topic of discussion here today will be the US dollar and its role as the reserve currency, and the question mark is it under threat at the moment? With me here I have market analyst Marco Tercica, also of RANsquawk. So Marco, in terms of this role of the dollar and potentially its role being under threat, how did this come about and what sparked these discussions at the moment?
Okay, Anthony, first and foremost, this discussion has its roots planted in the current global economic crisis, which of course originated in the United States. The PBOC head Zhu was actually the first to raise the issue back in March, when he laid claim to the fact that the IMF's special drawing rights, a sort of quasi-currency, could one day potentially displace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. This argument stemmed from concerns over the unprecedented levels of US debt, as well as the record US budget deficit, and also the undertakings of the Federal Reserve, who have embarked on this massive quantitative easing program, which could stoke the fires of inflation in the future. The results of such drastic moves, as we've been seeing of late, is of course a weakening dollar, and in the process a decrease in the value and purchasing power of one's dollar-denominated assets. China, a member of the so-called BRIC nations, has a vested interest in a stronger dollar currency. This is particularly pertinent for them as they have the largest amounts of dollar-denominated assets outside the United States. They hold approximately $760 billion worth in US treasuries, I believe.
Okay, so you mentioned there the word BRIC, obviously Brazil, Russia, India, China, very much at the forefront at the moment. There's been a lot of headlines written about that in the press at the moment. So tell us a bit more about these BRIC nations and why is their sort of influence growing at the moment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The BRIC countries, they have a combined GDP that represents roughly 15% of the global economy, and they also hold some 40% of the world's reserves. As a result of their fast-growing economies, some economists speculate, if you look at this chart, that their combined GDPs could total that of the G6 by 2040 and even be half that of the G6 GDP by 2025. As such, the main aim of BRIC is to form a political alliance whereby this gives them a platform to convert their growing economic power into more political clout, if you will. The BRIC nations recently underlined their growing influence by holding their first summit in Russia, where they called for a greater voice in world affairs, as well as a more diversified international monetary system, among other things.
Okay, so from my understanding then, we saw that chart that we've just seen. We're talking a longer term perspective in terms of these BRIC nations. So something, maybe not for the short term, but looking ahead. So, I mean, is the US dollar likely to be replaced soon? I mean, is that on the cards at all?
I mean, it's unrealistic to think the dollar will lose its appeal overnight. There are few viable choices at the moment, and such a shift would take a lot of time, as well as adjustment in many areas. The view is reflected by the IMF's quarterly currency composition of foreign exchange reserves, which showed the dollar share of central bank reserves for the first quarter actually rose to 64.9% from a previous 64%. Even the Chinese are aware that it would take at least 10 years or so for the yuan to become a major global currency, and as such have underlined their commitment to the US dollar in the short term. The Chinese Vice Foreign Minister this weekend at the G8 summit indicated that he did not see the dollar being displaced in the near term, and the G8 leaders even went as far as saying that the importance of the subject was not very high on the agenda at this moment in time. The Chinese understand perfectly well that their actions and attacks on the dollar put their dollar assets at risk, of course, and any shift in global currency reserve policy must be done at a gradual pace for this precise reason.
Okay, so So from what you're saying, if I understand right, then it's something more, I guess, especially with the G8 as a platform, very much politically, for them to put these sorts of issues on the stage, but something, as you've been saying, maybe not for the near term, maybe going forward. So looking again at the dollar, is there any alternatives at the moment? I know I've seen press in regards and analysis for the IMF's special drawing rights, the SDRs.
I mean, there are a range of options. The special drawing rights is one such option, though another contender to the dollar's might could be the euro currency. This is because it's the second most liquid currency in the world. However, this would have a detrimental impact on Eurozone growth, as a sharp rise in demand for the euro would, of course, impede growth. And as such, the ECB would not be receptive to such an idea. Also, one should not rule out the yen as another challenger to the dollar's dominance. However, the Bank of Japan, as we all know, have intervened on many occasions to lower the cost of exports for Japan. And as such, this undermines the case for the yen as a world reserve currency. And finally, just leading on to my last point, another alternative, of course, could be the yuan. However, the Chinese would have to loosen their grip on their financial system, and in order to make the currency more liquid and thus more appealing to investors. Though having said that, Chinese authorities have made moves to make the yuan more appealing to the international community. However, this is still very early days yet, Anthony.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I think you made some very interesting points there, and I'm sure this role of the dollar is going to be very much the focus point for the next at least few weeks, and then, as you pointed out, heading in the next few years. So that concludes our talk today in regards to the US dollar and its role as the global reserve currency. Stay tuned for further updates in terms of other pertinent topics that we'll be covering.